Hi, welcome to Visual Studio Toolbox Live. I'm your host, Robert Green, and joining me today are Francois, Jerome, and Nick, and we're going to talk about the Uno platform for the next hour or so. So welcome, and this will be a very good episode. We've done a couple of these live episodes with Uno. You guys always have great things to say, awesome demos. So there, the bar's been set. So you need to deliver on this one too.
No pressure. Good to see you again, Robert.
Good to see you, Robert.
So
Hey, Robert.
let's go around the screen and introduce ourselves, and then we'll get on to the content.
Happy to start. I'm Francois Tanguay, based in Montreal, Canada, and I'm the founder and the CEO of Uno Platform, but also our parent agency, Inventive, in Montreal.
On my side, so I'm Jerome Laban, the CTO of the open source project Uno Platform team, and I've been working in Uno for about 10 years, 11 years now. Mostly focusing on the Uno UI core, so anything related to what you're seeing on screen when the app runs.
Right.
And Nick Randolph, based in Sydney, Australia, and predominantly working with the Uno team on the extensions that we'll talk about today.
So special shout out and thank you to Nick for getting up at an ungodly early hour to do this. We very much appreciate it.
Not that you can tell, but it's actually approaching summer now, so the sun's already up, so it's getting warmer.
Still, it's very early.
It is.
All right. So Francois, do you want to start with a bit of an overview?
Yeah, let me share my screen. It'll be easier to. Let me know once you see it.
It's up.
Awesome.
And hide
Sorry.
that.
Yeah, sorry.
There we go. Perfect.
So yeah, I figured because we've been covering some of these topics in the past, I would just give a quick recap of why Uno, why we've been working on this and what it stands for, basically. But then really focus today on all the additions that we're bringing to Uno Platform beyond the core product that we've been working on, right? Because after all, we call it a platform, so there has to be more than just like a pure UI framework. So we started Uno, we've open sourced it in 2018. Jerome mentioned we've been at it for over 10 years, but as a way to have a great cross-platform UI framework solution in the market that would cover all the platforms where .NET runs today. So that's how we're going about it. So obviously, WinUI is already a technology that exists. We decided to align with the API contract that WinUI offers and basically bridge that technology to all the other platforms, right? So today, using Uno, you're able to bring a WinUI app or the API of a WinUI platform to all the other platforms. So basically the web using WebAssembly, similar to what Blazor would be offering in terms of experience, but also to mobile with iOS and Android, to Mac also with Mac OS natively, but also Mac Catalyst, to Android, and finally to all Skia-based platforms, namely Linux. So we're able to run on Linux IoT devices like Raspberry Pis and stuff like that. So really, we're allowing you to have a single cross-platform UI framework everywhere .NET runs today, and that's really a differentiator for Uno today. Obviously, you're able to run it using C# and XAML optionally as well. And it gives you a single code base experience, so you don't need to do per platform stuff. You can if you wish. And finally, what's great about Uno is we've open sourced it as an Apache 2 based license, so you're able to use it, distribute it freely without any ties to ourselves, if you wish. Does that make sense?
Yep. So the primary distinction, because it sounds similar, obviously, to what Xamarin has done and is doing, and what Maui is doing, primary difference is that the XAML you use is the WinUI XAML, as opposed to the Xamarin Form XAML or the Maui XAML or any other XAML that shows up in the future, right?
It is a difference in terms of API contract. So you're really aligning and coding against the WinUI API surface. But the two main differentiators as to why people typically come to Uno versus other UI technologies is the fact that we're running everywhere .NET runs. So if you want to target the web and or Linux as well, as opposed to just mobile and desktop platforms. Uno brings you that. And the second differentiator in terms of philosophy and approach is the fact that we're pixel perfect. And I'll come to this like quickly in 2 slides, but basically it means that if you design your app once on one platform, it's going to look identical on all the platforms you target. So you don't have to like tweak on a per platform basis or rely on the underlying native behaviors.
Okay.
And the way we've been able, because it is a massive undertaking, right? And like Jerome was saying early on, that he's been at it for 10 years. We've open sourced for 4 years. The way we've been able to accomplish that is basically that we have a great relationship with Microsoft, and they shared with us privately the Windows UI source code. And what it allowed us to do is by building or creating the building blocks for styling, for data binding, for resource management, for input tracking as well, we've been able to reuse Microsoft's internal source code and port it basically to a Uno version of that source code, because it's mainly C++. So we had to port it to C#. But basically we're running WinUI's private source code as an Uno open source project, right? So that's why we're always saying that Microsoft is probably the Uno's largest code contributor, because like 90% of the code in Uno is WinUI code, basically.
Cool.
Just quickly on Pixel Perfect, I would like, just to be clear, like there's 3 approaches in the market. We're the third one. On one end of the spectrum, UI frameworks allow you to just like wrap or facade, if you wish, the native controls and provide a common API for it. That's how React Native works. So it's really rendering the native controls underneath. And that's why you get into differences on a per platform basis if you're trying to accomplish a cross-platform single UI experience. On the other end of the spectrum, there's like, in order to solve that, if you wish, people are rendering individual pixels to the screen. The challenge with that, or canvas-based rendering, is you lose native behaviors. So like all the MIME support, and when you tap on a text entry field, for example, being able to copy paste and get those like contextual actions that the underlying operating system offers, you lose that with canvas rendering, and you need to recreate all of these from scratch. We decided to use a different approach, which is basically hopefully the best of both worlds, and that's mostly thanks to WinUI rich styling engine. So basically in Windows UI world, you're separating the control behaviors, which is like a button clicking and going through different states, from its visual appearance. And what allows you to do it when you're decoupling that is to keep the native behaviors while getting the pixel perfect advantages of having a single UI. And by doing that, that's how we've been able to create design systems that run on top of Uno controls, where they each have the same native behaviors, but they can have different looks based on platforms or the styles you want to target, right? So there's Fluent UI, that's one on a Windows space, Material UI, which is a leading design system, and then obviously you have more of a Cupertino Apple look to it, and those are design systems that we're shipping today along with Uno, just as styles or themes that you can bolt onto any Uno app. And what that drives, once you start getting into, you have a platform that can offer you pixel perfection, you're shipping design systems, how do you go about it and create a unique experience? Because like our primary target for Uno is to become or to be the most productive platform. And what does it mean to be the most productive platform to build .NET apps? It means trying to do more in less hours, right? So what we've been focusing on in terms of tooling is what we call Uno for Figma today. And that's what I want to introduce first, and then we'll get into extensions with Nick. But basically, and that's looking at our services side of the business and like understanding where do we spend time building apps, right? We have designers designing great user experiences for clients, and then they're like, here you go, developer, this is the design, it's been approved, go code it, right? So typically there's a traditional, heavy, cost-intensive, and expensive process where you then, as a developer or an integrator, look at this design, try to analyze all there is to it, the margins, the spacing, the alignments, the types of controls, the different visual states that UI might go through between a loading state, a data state, and error state, and try to figure out like, how am I going to code this UI, right? So this is at one end of the spectrum. It's traditionally called the design handoff process. And that's the way we've been doing things for a long time. At the other end of the spectrum, there's more and more tech startups that are trying to go like really far in the process of like, I'm going to look at your design and generate your app, basically, right? We're going to generate all the pages, generate all data access layers, everything, and then you're going to get a zip package with an app that runs that mimics what was in design. Mostly done for websites, also being done for mobile apps or desktop apps. And we believe they're going too far, in a sense, that there's a better compromise or a more pragmatic approach, and where you would not be too opinionated and try to generate too many different things, because there's so many ways, for example, to do data access at and as to how you consume like data over web services, right? There's REST APIs, there's GraphQL now, there's so many different ways. And like having to select one way or offer every single option out there might be too much. So we decided to focus with Uno for Figma into generating the UI code. And like you'll probably remember 14 years ago, Microsoft tried to do that and came up with a tool in the market. It was called Expression Blend, where you'd have like your design surface, you'd be able to drag and drop everything.
The most complicated tool I've ever seen.
Probably the least adopted tool, right?
I wonder if those two are related.
So yeah, but that was our observation as well, and we believe the primary reason because the idea was great. It was, in terms of cost savings, it was amazing because you would get all the XAML you need or all the UI code you need, and your designer was supposed to get into Blend and design everything. And that was probably the main flaw from our point of view, is you were forcing a developer-oriented tool onto a designer or designer team. So we took a different approach. The essence and the mission is the same, is to be able to generate all the UI code, because on an average size project, it can represent over 70% of the code in an app. It's massive. So if you're able to get massive savings on how much like XAML code or UI code is generated, and you can focus on business logic, that's where you have a chance to become a productive platform. So
and also, I mean, the way I write all of my apps is I write all the XAML and then I go and see what it looks like. And I've been doing enough XAML over the years to know that I can code a button and I can code a list view and I can code text boxes and labels, and I can put them in sort of the place they look. And then I can run the app and say, oh, that should be a little bit moved over. So I need to go back, and I know to adjust the margin. So if you've done enough hand coding of XAML, you can be somewhat efficient, but you're still spending a huge amount of time going back and tweaking the margin of this and the margin of that and bouncing back and forth between the XAML and the actual app. And even though you've got live preview and it's way better than it used to be, it still seems a tad backwards. The idea of being able to easily sketch out, if you will, the design and then just generate the XAML seems a lot more promising.
And those challenges, you have times the number of form factors you have, right? So now if you're targeting desktop, mobile, and like smaller or larger form factors as well, like tweaking those margins on all these form factors is even more challenging.
Yes.
And that's why there's better tools out there, design tools that are being adopted. Like Figma, I think, has 70% roughly of the market share of design tools today. So they really took over. And that's the main reason why we started with Figma. Doesn't mean we would have other sources for XAML generation. And we'll talk about this at the end towards our roadmap and all. But we started with Figma. So in order to do so, like, how do you go about it, right? Because Figma, you can still just draw pixels. So what we did to enhance productivity is provide to Figma designers a design system that aligns with what I showed, right? So we started with Material because it's pretty generic design system that you can tailor to your own app's needs and align with your brand. So we're shipping a component library of high-level components, buttons, toggle switches, checkboxes, like everything you have in a traditional app. We're shipping this as part of a component library. And then we have some plugin in Figma, and I'll show you in a second, that allows you to spit XAML out, but also take into consideration everything else that a UI has: localization, accessibility tags, state management or reactive state management, your binding expressions. So these are all optional facets that are being added to your XAML automatically based on metadata and insights, right? So it really gives you the power of a design to UI code solution. And hopefully you're able to get some of those productivity promises and benefits, right? So what we've seen in some of the apps that we had built without our Uno for Figma plugin, average size mobile or cross-platform app, 2,500 hours, we're able to get it down to like almost 10x that in terms of time savings, where most of the time on the UI is spent by the designer in a designer tool. It generates pixel perfect XAML. You get live previews if you wish, and then you can really focus on your business logic. So enough talking. Let me show you what it looks like and how it works. Yeah. So if you go to our website, we have an Uno for Figma section. If you scroll here at the bottom, there's two things you need to do as a Figma user to make this happen. You need to, once you have a Figma account that you can create for free, you need to install our Uno platform plugin for Figma. And I'll show you that in action in a second. And then also go to the second link, which is our toolkit. And that's what I meant. Like the toolkit is a list of components and really a design system that we're shipping as a Figma file that you can start from. So you just get a copy. It used to be called duplicate. And you'll see in here, we have like the design system itself. We have an example app that comes with it. And once you do that, you can open this in Figma. Let me go back to the component.
And again, the starting point for this is Figma. And there is a free version of Figma that would let you basically work on an app and design a bunch of screens and generate the XAML and get a sense for how you like it. And then there's paid versions above and beyond that if you want additional features, but you can get started doing this for free on
all that can be used for free. Exactly. Okay. So once you've duplicated the file that we're shipping, it comes with a design system. So typically, if you work with a company that has different color sets and like a strong brand, you would update these colors to align with your brand. And once you have that, you'll see that all of our components that we ship the Figma file with. So for example, like buttons with all the different states and all that, like name it in terms of like, there's like more just icon buttons. You'll see the check boxes and toggle switches and data entry and date pickers and like everything you can expect from a WinUI control set or that are available for both desktop and mobile, basically all platforms. They come baked in. So once you have this, you're able to start building an app. We already have a simple app here that you can see in action. And for each of these components, Figma, there's a notion called variants, right? So you can easily modify their components to behave like a variation of that design system. For example, here, my button could be elevated or outline as opposed to being filled or containing an icon, right? So let me go back to fill, for example, and you're able to easily lay out your design so that it's responsive and all that. And that's typically a designer that would be doing that. And once you have this done, here's our plugin that is embedded into the Figma experience, right? So Figma, they have both a website, a web version available, and a desktop, like Electron wrapper that runs, but this is still basically a web view. And the great thing about Uno is we've been able to create a plugin using Uno. So we have Uno running into Figma that embeds itself because Uno targets web. So we were able to get a web plugin built with Uno to the dog food, obviously, but also to leverage our own technology. And once you have this, you take a page like that login page, right? And if you go to the live preview, and I'm just refreshing the content, you'll see that I'm now getting that same view pixel perfect from what I have here. Yep. But this is a running Uno app because we're in a web targeting WebAssembly. Like it's actually an app running. It's not just a render of an app or something like that. Like you can click those buttons. Obviously, it doesn't navigate anywhere because there's no business logic. But you get a really good feel of how that design would behave in Uno. Like, and if you go here and look at the markup, like these are regular markup tags or XAML elements like password box and text box with data binding and all that. And all this basically we're generating that XAML from that design automatically, so it looks and behaves pixel perfect. And from this markup, we're loading the XAML at runtime to show a preview version, a live preview version of this as a running Uno app. So you get a good sense of whether or not something isn't supported yet in our plugin or how your designer specifications are going to look and behave in a new app.
And then do you get to save that XAML as a file, or do you?
Yeah, you just copy to clipboard or export it, and then you can move it to your solution. You get more, like you get on a per view basis, you get a lot of this, but you also get more. Like, for example, you're getting all of your resource dictionaries for the colors of your design system, right? So you can copy this as your like resource dictionary, so you don't have to extract those values manually. And even more than that, like for example, if I was to add an icon here and regenerate XAML, you would also get like the vector-based path for this icon automatically extracted from the Figma file. So that's where you're getting the productivity boost from.
Wow.
With a real-time effect, right? I've shown you, for example, if I was going back to a outline button, an outline button in a material design system is really a different style. So if I was to regenerate the markup, you would see that this button now, we didn't manually generate like white backgrounds and all that. No, we're like, okay, this is a button in the design system. It has a style and it's the outline button style. So we're really generating at the meta level of aligning with the design system so that if later you want to change what all outline button styles should look like across your app, not on a single page, you're able to just redefine that style. And that's really the beauty, like the richness of that WinUI styling engine that we used to have also in UWP and before that in WPF. That's what we're leveraging in order to be able to generate all of this code quickly.
So you could have a designer whose job it is to design the whole application, generate the XAML, have no idea what XAML is, and nobody cares because they just designed it.
Yes.
You can also have someone use this as a way to learn the WinUI XAML, whether you know XAML or not. So this could be your introduction to XAML or just your introduction to how WinUI XAML works. Or you can be someone like me that's pretty good at XAML, but is kind of tired of writing it by hand. And now this writes it for you.
Yes, and it works, and it can be pretty cumbersome, right? If you look at a,
I'm going to agree with Miguel.
Yeah, and like if you look at a page like a product details page, there's quite a bit of sections and like responsive layouts within that, depending on like the text size and the wrapping and all the different font weights and all that. So if you go look at this, like we've generated this within a second with all the icons and all that, and this is all the amount of XAML that's required.
What is going on? I apologize for my mouse acting up. We will get to Jose's questions in a second.
No worries.
All right.
For your point, Robert, I mean, it's worth noting that if you're used to coding XAML by hand, one of the challenges you're often faced with is consistency and making sure that you're using the same margins everywhere, same colors everywhere.
Yep.
And I think one of the things this tool promotes is the use of styles and a design system as a whole, rather than individual, setting properties on individual elements. And so it really benefits from that perspective as well.
Mm-hmm. Definitely.
And you can also start just like probably one last thing because you were I was showing here like that same product details page rendered, but obviously here on the left there's no image. But what if you want to get a really good feel of what it would look like? You can start the same experience you would have, and traditional designers with design data. You can start having mock data like JSON payloads and all that connects automatically to that view, so you can get a preview and you're able to define like basically your data binding expressions. So what we're really trying to do here, and what people have been asking is, can I get something similar to my WinForms designer first experience that I used to have, where I was so efficient and so productive of like, let me drag components onto a canvas. Let me just set a little bit of metadata, connect it to the various data sources, and let me see it in action. Right? Let me see that I haven't messed up and I actually have something that's functional. So that's the idea behind it.
Excellent. Excellent.
So let me go back here quickly. And we'll get to the roadmap. So next, I think it's worth, like if you go back to our first diagram here, like we have our cross-platform UI framework. We've shipped design systems with our themes. We have Figma that enables that and generates all the XAML, but it's still just like touching the surface of the UI layer, right? But there's a lot more to building an app than just having a UI layer. So we're trying to see what
Miguel's got a question before you move on.
Yes. Sorry, I can't see it with my...
Is Figma going to be compatible with C# markup?
Yeah, it's a very good question, right? You probably saw it here in my list. Like, there's clearly, so we're actively working, spoiler alert, but we're actively working on C# markup. So we're building, no pun intended, but the building blocks of having a C# markup set of extensions first in Uno, so WinUI plus Uno targets. And then once we have that, and it should ship really soon, once we have that, we have a separate track where we're already working on making sure that our Figma plugin would not only allow you to generate XAML, but also generate C# first. So the short answer is yes, we're actively working on this. I was talking to the team this morning again about it.
And what's your guys' view on the benefit of that for folks like us who have been doing XAML for quite some time? I can see why someone that is new to XAML would love not to have to learn XAML. But what if you already know it? What's the benefit of generating C# for your UI instead of sticking with XAML?
Yeah, so proof is in the pudding, right? Like not having to write 97 lines of XAML and being able to get it done within seconds is a productivity boost in itself. You've mentioned it before, like the learning opportunity of learning XAML as you go and make sure, because it is error prone to get like
we had to do it. These kids should have to do it too, right?
Yeah. We've suffered, so let them suffer.
But I think, Robert, I mean, if you're familiar with XAML, there's definitely no reason why you should be forced to switch to C# markup, for example. I mean, it really comes down to a personal choice as to whether you're comfortable in XAML and you like that separation between your design markup and your code. But equally well, I mean, there's a movement towards blending logic with code. I mean, we've seen this with other platforms that have come to market being quite successful. And so it's a logical choice for and it cuts down the learning curve for new people. If they only have to learn C#, then it gives them a quick step into building UI apps as well. So
that's absolutely true. If you would have the ability to build the same app and not have to learn XAML, I think that'd be very exciting. I was just more thinking about knowing XAML. What would be the benefits of essentially giving it up and just doing everything in C#?
Yeah, we have those ongoing discussions. Like
that's a lot of discussions there. So that's interesting because the use of C# against the XML. So let's call it the XML XAML. What you're gaining is mostly not having to use XML. You're still going to have to use XAML objects in a sense. So, but you're going to be using the language construct of C#. So that can make it easier. Now, the thing is that it still is a data-bound object model. So that means that there are similarities with the rest of the binding. So being able to use actual IntelliSense to have what you use in general with C# is probably going to make it easier for developers that don't want to have to use XML and not XAML in a sense. So it's a matter of choice. But in some cases, if the language evolves, and that may be something that we can see, I would say C#12, and they're start to adding things that looks like Dart, make it easier to write, for instance, because that's the target that we're aiming at for developers, and that could be interesting.
Yeah. It's definitely happening. It'll definitely get there. So it's interesting to look out for.
And there's aspects on the tooling side as well, right? So for example, right now you have both XAML hot reload and C# hot reload. If you're on a C# only kind of syntax, you're able to focus all of your tooling onto C# hot reload, right? Which has different capabilities than XAML hot reload. So it can be seen as a set of advantages. But for sure, like XAML isn't going anywhere. We're still planning to support both. Obviously, we're actually struggling the other way around because like WinUI XAML in some cases is more permissive or wasn't thought to be C# first in terms of object model. So we need to do some workarounds to make sure it's also working from a C# first world.
Right. Yeah, it's definitely not going anywhere. Code never dies.
Exactly. So let me share this again just for Nick so that we're able to switch gears and get into our extensions, which is an entirely different beast. So go ahead, Nick.
I was just going to add that, so far we've really looked at sort of the design aspects and the opportunities to basically improve the overall app development experience by focusing on how we can take the design and bring it to code. But as Francois mentioned, there's a whole bunch more that, you know, typical app developers have to go through in order to, you know, to build a regular app from a code perspective. You know, setting up the app, you know, connecting to back-end data sources, working out what the storage model is going to be, you know, simple things like localization, stuff like that, that come as part of the platform, but you still end up having to write a whole bunch of boilerplate code to actually bring it back into your application and make it accessible, and do the things that you want it to do. This spawned the UNO extensions, which predominantly I've been involved in. And this offers everything from app bootstrapping, which we've seen in projects like Maui and stuff like that. And the work that we've been doing around extensions is actually fundamentally built on the work that Microsoft has done around the Microsoft extensions. So if you've come from the web world, you'll be familiar with the work that's come out of the ASP.NET core team, that's evolved into a more general set of extensions that are available for every project type. And so we've leveraged that to bring it to the UNO platform in a way that makes sense from a perspective of building an application. And so there's, you know, various categories like, you know, you set up the host, which gives you things like dependency injection, it gives you configuration, it sets up the ability to do logging. And then you've got some higher level abstractions around things like HTTP and making web service calls, setting up localization, and even things like navigation. And we've got some reactive based bindings as well. So. And I think
share the screen, Nick?
Yeah, what I'm going to do is actually share my screen, and we'll just go through a bit of a demo of, you know, getting started with the UNO extensions, and we'll talk through various points where it adds to the process. Go ahead and share. So what we're going to do is actually start from building an app using the UNO extensions app template. And so I'll go ahead and kick that off. So we're using a .NET U project. Kick that off. There we go. It's doing its thing. And so what we'll get here is basically we'll get an app for each of the target platforms that UNO supports. Let's just go. Launch that in Visual Studio. Just condense the projects. And as you can see, it's actually generated quite a few different projects for us. So you can see over here, we've got all of the target platforms. So this is using the new sort of Net 6 support for mobile. So basically that encompasses your mobile platform. So Mac OS, iOS, Android are all encompassed in this mobile project. And then we've got the other targets that UNO supports. Beyond that, we've also got a number of other projects. So we've got some testing projects. So you could do some unit tests, as all good developers will want to do. And we can write some UI tests. So basically, this will actually allow you to step through your application and actually test it. We've also managed to break down your application into sort of the two main parts, where you've got your business logic, and those ones would be typically a Net standard or a Net 6 library. So it's all of the logic that's kind of separated away from your actual UI. And then we've got a UI library, which is a shared project that's shared across the various targets. And this is where you'd expect to see all your XAML, and anything that's UI related would go into this project. And so this out of the box gives you a very nice structure for your application. It encourages a good sort of separation of your business logic away from the actual UI that you're actually building. And so let me run this application. We're actually going to target, just show the windows ahead. So let's just unload those, set this as startup, and we'll kick off that. And it will take a second or two to build first up. And what we'll see when we actually launch the application, and actually see one that's not styled using the Fluent UI, which you typically get with a Windows app out of the box. But this is actually styled out of the box with the material design language, which Francois has mentioned that we get out of the Figma toolkit. And it's started up with a couple of pages, so you can see the navigation here. But you'll notice here we've got a navigation bar that's automatically wired up for us to allow us to navigate back to the previous page. And it's interesting because the navigation bar is actually on this first page, but because this is the first page of the application, there's nothing on our backstack. There's no back button. So that's all sort of there for us. We don't need to write extra logic to hide and show the back button based on whether there's a second page there or not. That's automatically done for us. Now this app's looking pretty bland, so it doesn't have a huge amount in it. So let's see if we can actually go and improve that. So let me just stop this here. We'll bring up the XAML for our main page. And as you'd expect, it's pretty basic. It's just got the navigation bar at the top and our button in the middle of the screen. But if we switch over to Figma, so this is the same Figma file that Francois was showing earlier. I'm going to select this search page, the search product page, and I'm going to switch over to the XAML tab in the plugin. I'll hit refresh at the bottom here, which will show us the XAML. And I'm going to take a copy of that. We'll switch back to Visual Studio, and I'm just going to drop this straight into here, like that. Now, I know from experience that this is actually going to give me a slight build error, which you can see here in the code. If I come over here and Control Dot, it's actually prompting me just to fill in a namespace. So I'll go ahead and do that. And then we'll give the app a run. Now, I haven't obviously written up any code to bring in a list of products or anything like that. So what we should see here is something that's been styled accordingly, but we've currently got no products. And you can see here all of the controls here for text entry and things like that. They're all wired up, and we're looking pretty good, except for the fact that we've still got no content. So let's switch back to Visual Studio. I'm actually going to go and grab a quick reference to the community toolkit, which we're going to need in a second. And we'll come over to our solution. Under solution items, you can see all of our reference packages in here. So I'm just going to add in the community toolkit in there. And then we'll come back to our code, and we're going to wire up some logic to actually show the list of products. And we're going to use a dummy data source for this. So I'll come down here to our main view model. So you can see here there's a natural pairing between our view models and the corresponding pages. And we're just going to grab some code and drop this in. Into the bottom of our view model. Normally, I would break this out into various files for importing this information, but for the time being, we're just going to drop this in here. So this is our endpoint. So it's a dummy JSON endpoint, and this is going to pull back. It's a list of products. So we should expect a product response that basically has a list of an array of products in it. If I come up to the top here, we're going to come into our code file, and we're going to go dummy JSON endpoint. We're going to add that as a dependency into our constructor here for our main view model. And down here, we're then going to go ahead and actually load some product information. So load products and pass in our endpoint into that. And we'll have Visual Studio go ahead and create that method for us. Come down here. I'm actually going to make it an async task so we can await it. And in here, we're going to basically call the endpoint to return a list of objects. So bar response equals wait endpoint dot get products. Now, we're going to have to assign that somewhere so that we can data bind to it. So let me just come back up here, and we're going to change our view model to inherit from observable object coming from the community toolkit. So I'll add the, I could spell it. Why is it not? Let me just check that we've got that dependency properly in there. Aha, that's why. Okay, let's just try this again. There we go. So add our namespace and our using statement in there. And we'll come down here and actually create a property that we're going to data bind to. And so we'll use the observable property attribute here. And what we've got to specify here, instead of actually defining the property, which we're getting IntelliSense to prompt us to, we're actually going to define the backing variable. So we'll do private product items. And I know from experience that the data binding that's been set up in our UI actually uses the items as opposed to products. And so we'll come down here, and here we're going to actually set that items to be equal to the response.products. Okay, so that's looking pretty good. Oops, there's a property on there. So the one thing to note here is that I'm actually referencing the generated property name. So I'm not setting the backing variable like lowercase items. I'm actually setting the uppercase items, which is the generated product or generated property. Okay, so that's what we need from our view model perspective. Now, obviously, we haven't specified actually where that data is coming from. We've just defined what the data is that we're going to be returning. So we actually need to go back to configuration and actually make sure that our application is configured properly to allow us to pull in this data. So we'll come to our app host, and this is where we're actually setting up the boilerplate for our application. So I'm going to come in here, and I'm actually going to change the configure services to actually specify our JSON endpoint. And also in there, I'm actually going to just come down here, and for the time being, I'm actually just going to disable the reactive data bindings. And then we're going to switch over to our configuration file, so our app settings.json. And we've just got to specify what the actual endpoint is that we're going to be connecting to. Let's pop that into here. So this is actually defining what that URL is. And if you haven't seen it before, this dummyjson.com is actually it's an available endpoint that you can pull into sample applications and the like, just to actually get things up and running. So we should be pretty good to go. So let's hit the play button and let's see some data showing. Okay, so a couple of we haven't got our images appearing, but we can modify the data binding accordingly. But we do actually have our data showing. Now, the one thing that would be really nice is if we tapped on an item for that navigation to work, to at least show us the details of that item. So what we're going to do is just actually switch back to our code. We're going to come back to our main page. Just stop this for a second. And we're going to come down to our list view, which is defined in our XAML. And we're just going to modify the XAML slightly here. So we're going to say navigation.request equals second. Now, the second comes out of the fact that our pages are defined as second page and second view model. And this navigation is actually based on the fact that we've got these routes that are defined in the bootstrapping of our application. Now, I don't really need to do very much to actually change the navigation as such, but I do need to let the second view model know that it should be expecting a product to be passed to it as part of that navigation. So I'm going to change this view map to being a data view map. And then I'm going to go back to our second view model and say, I want this to actually expect a product to be passed in. So we're actually going to change this to a record. And I'm going to expect a product. And we'll give it the name product as well, because that way we can data bind to it. And so the last thing we really need to do is go to our second page and actually put some UI in there to actually show what it's going to look like. And for the purpose of this, I'm just going to put in a text block in the middle of the screen. So we'll do binding to product.name, and we'll bump the font size up a bit, say 32, and we'll do, we'll align it in the center just so that we can see it easily. Okay, so there we should be pretty good from a data binding perspective. So let's just go and run that. And now we should have some navigation wired up, and we should be able to actually see the at least the name of our product that we're going to bind to. So there's our product list. Click on the item, and we get to our second page with that data binding wired up. So, like, without having to write a huge amount of code, we've been able to pull in the look of our search product page from Figma with minimal changes to the XAML. We've been able to wire up some code without having to write a huge amount of boilerplate code for connecting to a service, setting the application up, doing things like logging, those sorts of things are already come to as part of that host builder setup that we already have. We've added navigation to go between pages, all without writing a huge amount of code. And that's the whole point of extensions, is we're trying to take away the sort of the boilerplate code that a lot of applications would have to build out of the box. So,
and Nick, to go like just to build on top of that, Robert, like the philosophy between Uno extensions is not to reinvent the wheel, right? It's really to provide the glue and fill some of the gaps where there's nothing in the community that's really ubiquitous in terms of guidance. So, for example, here, yes, we had to create a new extensions set of packages for navigation, because like if you want to do view model first navigation, there's really nothing out there that would work with WinUI and Uno platforms that would offer you these levels of abstractions, right? So yes, we did something for navigation, but what Nick showed, we didn't like try to reinvent MVVM kind of patterns. Community Toolkit is great at doing that, so you can easily bring it in. So then all or nothing, like we're just trying to make sure we can stitch everything together. Same thing with REST API access. Refit is a great package. So the only thing we're doing in Uno extensions is to make sure it can easily be bootstrapped, relies on navigation, is dependency injection friendly, and can fit within a host model. But you can rely on these great third-party packages from the community and bring it into your Uno app. And we're really there just to augment and fill some of these gaps. So navigation is somewhere where there wasn't necessarily a ubiquitous recipe. State management in a more declarative, immutable, reactive way wasn't obvious either that there's something out there. So we're providing Uno reactive extensions that departs from the MVVM model and brings you more of the MVU capabilities that you might have heard of. So that's really where we're investing in terms of Uno extensions.
Cool. Very cool. All right. Let's see. I don't know if we have any outstanding questions that haven't been.
There's actually one from Johnny.
Johnny. There it is. Okay.
So the question is about Uno Bootstrapper converging with .NET. So what we're doing with the Uno Bootstrapper is about providing WebAssembly access to .NET applications in general. And it started off from something that came from the Mono runtime, when it was actually in the Mono/Mono GitHub repository. And when it moved to .NET, the .NET/runtime repository, then a lot of bootstrapping happened, and it went to MS Build and things like that. So it's kind of baked in the .NET when you're in .NET runtime when you're installing it, and kind of diverged a little bit. So we have the the Uno Bootstrapper that does a lot of what the .NET runtime does when installing a Blazor app, for instance, or in .NET 7, there's going to be the, I don't know how they're calling this, but it's the way to create a WebAssembly application without anything. It is just a plain .NET application without any UI or anything. And what we're going to do eventually is align both. So remove features from the Bootstrapper and rely more onto what .NET is going to do. The thing is that there are many things that we're doing in the Bootstrapper that .NET doesn't do yet. So we're going to be adjusting to get there at some point, probably for the coming year. So let's say hang in there. we're gonna get to that point where we do have less code that's custom to Uno.
Okay, Jose has a question about MVUX.
Yeah, probably worth a stream in itself. But in a nutshell, when I was explaining, we're trying to like fix some of the gaps in the community. On one side, you have XAML-based technologies where you're able to define data bindings one way or two ways. So then it's really separating your view model or your views from your data, right? So, or your application data. So this is the traditional MVVM pattern that's in place to do this. It's a way where you have state in your view model and you push it and notify your view that your state has been updated. And more of an MVU pure model, you have your state, and every time the state changes, it tells the view, rebuild yourself entirely by parsing your new state and let the view render a new version of itself based on the updated state. MVUX is a way where we're in And that's what Uno Reactive implements is our own coined term as a way to have a XAML-friendly, data binding-friendly MVU pattern. And that's what Uno Reactive stands for. So the primary characteristics of MVU patterns is that you're relying on immutable structures. So like you need to create a new instance of that data structure, like records are a good example of immutable structures, in order to push a new version of a state. Right? So immutable, reactive in nature, where like it keeps, you're reacting to the fact that new values are being pushed in. And then there's additional characteristics like declarativeness of your application model, if you wish. So we're implementing all that in Uno Reactive, while making sure by generating some of the glue that it works still with data binding engines at the view level. So it's really that glue between a pure immutable model and a view that is in itself supports two-way bindings, and that's what Uno Reactive is accomplishing. So implementing what we call MVU X for XAML. So
that's on its way? And
no, it's already out. Like
Okay.
we've pushed updates recently. Within Uno, we're trying to push new releases every month.
Okay.
So if you're following us and read some of our blog post content, you'll see in our release notes all the updates as to how we're increasing and improving those extensions. So it's part of our extensions package, packages in terms of new capabilities. So it's already out there.
Okay. So it's kind of on the roadmap. What are we expecting? Wait, before I ask that question, I passed on this one by Jose.
Ours, of course. So we do have an extension that's part of the Uno platform, and that's the one that you get to have some custom hot reload. So I'm sorry, it's not custom; it's a hot reload. So for XAML and C#, as well as all the .NET templates, and we're going to be adding more into the tooling so that the experience gets better, whether it's with Figma or others that may be in the future. Now, with regards to other extensions that you may want to use, there's so many of those. They rely specifically on what's available. I know that there are many that are related to XAML, syntax coloring and helping and refactoring that you can find. I have the name.
I was going to say that we benefit from the fact that we're WinUI first, in the sense that all of the tooling that the WinUI team was working on, we get to leverage as part of the platform.
Exactly.
So.
Okay, so what's the roadmap? What's coming up? What are your plans for .NET 7, which is just around the corner, and anything else that we can expect?
Yeah, maybe Jerome can start with what we're cooking for .NET 7.
Yeah, sure. So that .NET 7 actually was merged this morning, as part of the build. So we're testing it currently. So if you want to try it out, you can do it. There may be Dragon still, so it's very fresh. But we're waiting on some of the advancements that are going to be made by the Maui team, so that we can get the mobile stuff going included as well. This all the .NET new things like threading and CMD support and what's there as well. All the code generation features, like you're going to be able to use all the new and shiny regular expression generation that is going to be speeding up everything up. So it's going to be a quite amazing release. There are lots of updates in AOT and performance in general. So we're pretty excited about this release and what it's going to bring to the table.
Yeah, and there's more, right? So this is really for the core UI framework, making sure with parity and we're able to offer day zero support for .NET 7. But then on top of that, in the extensions, Nick and the team has been doing great work, not only in navigation, but some of the other abstractions, right? Authentication is a good example of an Uno extension that provides value by making sure you're able to use MSAL, OpenID Connect, custom authentication, and all that. So we've been able to abstract all that away. But there's more extensions being worked on. I've mentioned C# for markup extensions that are actively being worked on, but there's more also on the roadmap. Validation, we believe that we can help with making sure that you're able to surface your business rule results at the UI layer. So exception handling, analytics, like all these key concerns that you have as cross-cutting concerns when you're building apps. You want to make sure that they're all nicely packaged as Uno extensions and like work friendly with configuration, dependency injection, and work in the hosting model. So this is it basically for Uno extension. So we have a year's worth of work is still on the roadmap for extensions at least. And then on the tooling side, what's great is like I showed you Figma, Uno for Figma, sorry, that allows you to generate XAML for a design first experience, right? So if you have designers on your team and you want to do something that's polished, that's pixel perfect, it makes sense to start with Figma. But I was mentioning being able to have a WinForms like experience, right? And WinForms, like the experience would start in Visual Studio and would end in Visual Studio. So easily imagine that design surface that isn't available today for WinUI or Uno apps living in Visual Studio, where you have a toolbox of components that you can drag and drop onto a design surface, get to see a live preview of how it behaves, how it looks like, being able to change some of its properties from a layout perspective, from the variants that I was showing of a button having different styles and all that. You could easily imagine that living within Visual Studio itself, or maybe on our playground, right? When you go to playground, that platform to Uno, you get a sandbox of where you can type in a UI and see a live preview of it. That was another great location where a design first toolbox enabled experience of being able to drag components and see those UI widgets for people to easily onboard onto the UI technology, right? It's pretty like intense in terms of how much knowledge you need to have in order to master a UI technology like this. So if you have something more with a drag and drop kind of experience, we believe it makes sense. So it's clearly something we'd like to invest and explore.
Yeah, that'd be
get
pretty
feedback
cool
from the community. Yeah.
Yep.
So we should be busy for a few more weeks, is what I'm saying.
Excellent. All right. That's awesome. Any wrap-ups before we
Yes. Maybe just one last thing. It's October, so it's Hacktoberfest. We've been participating since Uno has been open sourced pretty much. So if you go to platform.uno/Oktoberfest, you can register and participate and contribute in any way or form to Uno. We have open issues that are tagged. We have documentation, samples. There's so many ways to contribute and engage with the team. We're on Discord. We're on GitHub, obviously. So it should be relatively easy for the team to start and connect with the team.
Cool. So thank you guys very much for coming on the show. Thanks to all who watched and asked questions. And we will see you next time on Visual Studio Toolbox.